welcome to Mindful Mutterings. I'm Chris Maragkakis, Essex anxiety coach, and this episode is all about self-sabotage and how we can break the cycle of it. So when I was thinking about how I was going to talk about this, I was trying to come up with the best way of doing it. And what I've decided to do is I'm just going to answer the questions that I'm asked the most. So there might be a little bit of repetition, but I think actually that might be quite handy because it'll help you to see how the same thread goes through all the same issues. So let's get started. So the first question I'm often asked is, what exactly is self-sabotage and how do we know we're doing it? So essentially, a self-sabotaging behaviour is something that we repeat often that stops us from progressing forward in life. So, for example, in a relationship, it might be that we feel that maybe we're not worthy of a good relationship, or that relationships never work for us. And so to get in first before the other person can help us, we'll do something in every relationship that means that it ends. And that kind of validates our belief that either we're not good enough or that relationships don't work for us. Or it might show up in the workplace in that we don't take on opportunities, we don't speak up in a meeting, or we don't put ourselves forward for promotion or new activities because we don't feel that we're good enough, or we feel that someone else will always be better than us, or because we just don't think that the world works that way. Something in our belief system has taught us that we are not worthy of that, and so we stop ourselves. We do actions, or it might be even that we go as far as making ourselves look bad in a job or a relationship so that it ends, or we don't get we don't put ourselves outside of our comfort zone, and we again prove ourselves right that these things don't work out for us. So then we end up stuck in this cycle of things that just keep repeating ourselves, and we know we're doing it when we find ourselves saying, why does this keep happening to me? Because obviously if we've become aware of it, then it's happening so often that it's become a pattern of behaviour. So that's the first question. Second question I'm asked a lot of is, if I know what it is, why do I keep repeating it? Which is an excellent question, but also one that's really, really difficult to become aware of, because although we might know that we're repeating self-sabotaging behaviour, it's based in our subconscious. Nobody willingly goes out to set themselves up to fail. It's a subconscious response to a belief that we've created somewhere back in our past. So the reason that we keep repeating it is because we're not actually aware of it. So something will happen that will trigger our belief, and because we kind of live on autopilot a lot of the time, that will trigger the behaviour that we do, and we'll just keep repeating this cycle, and nothing will change until we start to become aware of how our life is, and taking responsibility for it, and looking for patterns and where things aren't working out for us. And then when we're looking at those things that aren't working out for us, trying to work out what it is that needs changing. And we repeat it because we're not aware of the belief that is at the basis of the action that we're doing. So it's a completely subconscious reaction to life. And also because if we're not aware of it, and even if we are aware of it to a certain extent, we're actually going to have to change for things to change, and we become very comfortable in the way that we're living, and fear builds up around the idea of the change, because we're in this lovely little comfort zone. We've got a very small world because we've created a cage of fear and limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves, and to step outside of that then starts to create anxiety and stress and overwhelm. And actually it's much safer, even though it's not working out for us, to just continue with things the way they are. And it's not until, like I say, we bring all of this from our subconscious into our conscious mind and start challenging that comfort zone and the beliefs that we have, that we'll be able to stop repeating these behaviours. The third question is it linked to childhood? Yep, probably. A lot of stuff is. It could also have been caused by beliefs and events that have happened as an adult. But on the whole, the idea of who we are tends to come from children, when we were children. And if we had particularly, critical parents, or a teacher that made us feel unworthy, or we just kind of watched what was going on as a child and kind of thought that maybe we didn't deserve to have, what everyone else has. And that probably isn't true. It's just what we perceived at the time. Then we create a whole set of beliefs around that. And then those beliefs we take on board and we identify with them. And that becomes who we are and how we act in the world. So yeah, it probably does come from your childhood, or most definitely comes from a period in your past. Also, if we experience trauma as a child, and all trauma is an event that had such an emotional overload that we couldn't deal with it at the time, the brain, to keep us safe, because that is the brain's job, tends to try and suppress or ignore that event because it knows we're not capable of dealing with it at that time. And the more energy it uses to suppress it, obviously it's pushing it into our subconscious, the more power it's giving us. More importantly, because we've been pushed into fight or flight, because we've had an emotional experience that we couldn't deal with, or we've had an experience that has caused an emotional response that we couldn't deal with, and it hasn't been resolved, we haven't actually told our brain to turn off that fight or flight response. So we're still living in a heightened sense of awareness, and what the brain is doing is just seeing danger everywhere. And of course that's then feeding into the way that we live our life, and we become very fearful, and the fear creates anxiety because it's not being resolved, and that then is shaping what we think we're capable of in the world. So you can start to see how this all feeds into self-sabotaging behaviour. Another question that I'm asked is, does fear of failure contribute to self-sabotaging? Absolutely. Any fear is contributing to our self-sabotage. And fear of failure, or fear of judgment, or fear of stepping outside what we know, or drawing attention to ourselves, all contributes to our self-sabotaging behaviours. Because this fear takes on such a huge role in our life. And as I said, a lot of it's subconscious, so we don't really know we're doing it. What's actually happened is, over the years, bit by bit, we've built this cage that we're living in that is, controlled by routines and is very samey, and we don't like to do anything that will rock the boat because of so many different reasons. It might be that we are, worried that people will think we're being stupid, or it might be that we think that other people are better than us, or it might be that we think that people will think, who does she think she is, why is she doing this? And there's all these little stories that we tell ourselves that are creating this fear, and that fear is based on an idea that we've had that's come from something that we've witnessed in the past. And like I said, it could be the way someone's responded to us, it could be that we've misunderstood a situation, it could be that we've seen something happen again and again, and we've formed an identity around what we think we saw as a child. And that might not necessarily be true, but it's given us this way to behave that's kept us safe for so long that we don't want to rock the boat. So yes, fear of any description, but especially fear of failure, will stop us from taking on opportunities, or trying new things, or approaching people, or doing something that we might love, in case we fail or in case we're rejected, and we want to save ourselves from that pain and that hurt. Another question I'm asked is, what do we actually do then? How do we start to break this cycle? So obviously we need to become aware of why we're doing what we're doing and where those beliefs come from, and then we can start to break them down and question them and challenge them and change them ultimately. But to do that, we need to bring it from our subconscious into our conscious. So we need to start paying attention to what's happening in our life, and we need to take responsibility for it. And when I say take responsibility, I'm not talking about taking blame. I'm talking about being responsible, because when we accept that we have free will and we've made decisions, and with hindsight they may not be the best decisions, but they were definitely the best decision for us at that time, once we accept responsibility for that, then we move ourselves from a victim point of view, like life is happening to us, to actually, I can make a change, I can take back control of my life, and I can move on. So the first thing we have to do is take responsibility, and we need to start becoming aware. Now, to start off with, this is going to be a reflective process. It's going to be a case of something happening that didn't go well, and us then looking back and thinking, right, well, what was I thinking before that happened? Why did I behave in the way that I behaved? And what was the outcome? So you're kind of looking at, like, where can I change the way that I'm behaving? And to do that, we need to stop living on autopilot and just reacting to things, and we need to shift into a way where we can take a pause and actually learn how we're going to respond to things. But that's easier said than done when we're first starting to do it. So reflection is key, and also journaling is really useful here, because when it's all bouncing around in our head or when we're living with it, it's very difficult to work out where our triggers are, what our repeating beliefs are, where our self-sabotaging behaviours are coming from. But when it's written down, and especially when we use pen and paper, the brain starts to problem solve it for us, but also we can start to see similarities, and we can start to group together behaviours or thoughts, and then that will give us an insight into our triggers. So that's the first thing we can do. Then we need, like I say, to start challenging the thoughts that we have. So one good place to start is, once we become aware of the little thought that's in our head, is to challenge it and say, whose voice am I actually hearing? Is this my voice? Is this a parent's voice, teacher, friend? Where does it come from? Is this what I'm actually seeing in my world? Am I seeing the evidence of this belief around me? And if I'm not, why am I actually holding on to this belief? And then we can start to work through it, and some of the reason we're holding on to it is because it's what we've always done, so it's comfortable. And some of the reason will be because we've never really noticed it before. And then we can start to break down and reframe and move on from the beliefs that have been holding us back. And also we need to start with small steps. We can't suddenly go from living in a very tightly controlled world where we've been very fearful, where anxiety's been ruling our life, where we've got these self-sabotaging behaviours, and where we're scared to move out of our comfort zone, to suddenly, jumping out of planes, going up and talking to random people, because it will feel so alien to us that it will actually cause more overwhelm. Better to start with really small steps, doing something that we can achieve quite easily, because what that will do is that will give us a hit of feel-good chemicals. That will then change how we feel. That will start to write a new process in our brain. And the more success that we have in life, the more confident we become. The more confident we become, the more resilient we are, and the easier it is then to deal with problems without going into overwhelm or panic, which means then that we don't spend so much time in our fight or flight response, which means that we can problem solve effectively. And that in turn gives us back power over our lives. And then I'm often asked, how much does self-worth have? How much impact does self-worth have on self-sabotaging behaviour? Loads, absolutely loads. It's very similar to the fear. How we feel about ourselves and how much confidence we have will impact on how much fear we have. If we are quite confident and we know our worth and we know our value, then we have a lot less fear, because we know what we're capable of, and we know that we can handle stuff, and so life becomes that much easier. But if we don't feel that way, if we feel that maybe we're not worthy, or we're not lovable, or we're not very good at dealing with things, or we don't make good decisions, or our problem solving skills are lacking, or whatever it was that we've seen in the world or been told so many times that we now believe, then it's going to be so difficult to move on from that and suddenly become this outward, confident person. We need to take small steps and start giving ourselves reasons to like ourselves and to become more confident and empowered. And ways to do that, again, has to be small steps. It has to be, we cannot put ourselves into overwhelm to do this. But what we can do is we can start listing our good points, and we can start being aware and changing our focus of, instead of looking out for the negatives that we see in our life or that people say about us or to us, we can start listening for the positives. And we can start building that way on rewiring our brain, because what we need to do is we need to totally rewire the neural pathways in our brain away from negativity and critical and putting us down, into looking for the more positive, finding ways to grow our confidence and become empowered. And the way to do that is always repetition. And so we have to start small, and we have to start challenging things at a level that we're comfortable with. And then we can start to grow, because as with the practical steps for self-sabotaging, steps to build confidence move in a similar way. When we do something and we do it well, it builds our confidence, it builds our resilience, we become more confident, and we get a really positive cycle. So that's really how we start to build our self-worth and negate some of the self-sabotaging behaviours, because when we feel more confident, obviously we'll have less opportunities to sabotage ourselves. But ultimately we need to rewire our brain, and that will involve working out what happened in our life, or where that belief came from, or what we heard so many times that we thought it was actually who we are, instead of just maybe somebody else's perception of how they are imposed on us. And do the work there, so that we can start to unpick that, and we can start to see the truth of it, and we can start to rewire our brains to believe a truth that works for us, rather than something that's been imposed on us by someone else. So when you put all of those together, self-sabotaging behaviour stems from something that's happened in our past, where we've become fearful of something happening. That's then created a belief which we've taken on board as our identity, as who we are. And that is then causing us to feel anxious every time that's triggered. And to allay that feeling of anxious and to feel in control, we often do something to get in first, so that we control the damage, or we don't put ourselves in a position where someone else can hurt us. And that becomes the self-sabotaging behaviour, because it stops us from growing. We become stuck in a cycle of, like I said, routine and a cage of fear. And those self-sabotaging behaviours are controlling our lives. So if you've got any questions, please get in touch. essexanxietycoach.org.uk. I'm happy to answer anything you've got, or leave a message in the comments on the podcast. But I hope you found this useful. I hope you can start to see where maybe you are self-sabotaging, and at some point we all do it. But more importantly, what steps you can start taking to understand where you're self-sabotaging and why you're self-sabotaging. And maybe that will give you a little bit of insight into how you can start to rewire that and change that in your brain, so that you no longer feel the need to do it. So thanks very much for hanging out with me today. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Take care. Bye.